Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Megan Smith and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on May 28th with Roger P. Meinert. He will be giving a presentation entitled German Immigrants in American Church Records Goes to Pennsylvania. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be talking about using Google Translate, Gemini, and Google Lens for genealogical research. Before we begin, here's a little bit about James. James has over 40 years' experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy's Star blog. He has served as a family history volunteer for 18 years and has presented at expos and conferences around the US, Canada, and Europe. He is a member of the board of directors of the Family History Guide Association and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. James is a professional photographer and has 7 children, 34 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. If James is ready, we'll turn the time over to him.
Howdy. Nice to be here today for another webinar for the BYU Library Family History Center. It looks to me like I have to update my little note of background because I have a few more great-grandchildren that have showed up lately and some expecting. So we'll see if we can keep that number current. Today we're going to talk about using Google Translate and Gemini and Google Lens for genealogical research. Now, the key here is the last part of that, and that's for genealogical research. In other words, we know that these are valuable things. We know that they can do a lot of things for us. Just recently, we traveled, did some traveling in Europe, and I can tell you that using Google Lens to translate things and to get around with the different countries is much enhanced with the using these Google tools. And of course they would be helpful if you went to your ancestral homeland and used the information. But what we've tried to do, and when I say we, I mean those people that I work with in the library and also online with a lot of people. But what we're trying to do is come up with ways that these things can be, how they're helpful to be used directly with finding your ancestors and doing what we do when we do genealogical research. And these are really good tools. So let's get moving here. As genealogists, as we research back in time, we'll inevitably encounter a language we don't know. Now, this is just, and this is a universal thing, because whatever language you speak now will have changed from the language that it was previously if you go back far enough in time. This is a principle of languages that they change over time. And so even if we speak English, you'll learn very quickly if you keep going back and back and back in English research that eventually the language that you encounter is substantially different than the language that we speak today. And another challenge. So the question is, what would you do with a document like this? Okay. I sometimes choose some things that are very, very hard to read, but let's bring it up closer and we can see a little bit here. First of all, perhaps you would have difficulty recognizing the language, and you might have some further difficulty of of identifying what it was talking about and whether it would be something that you would be interested in from a genealogical standpoint. So if we move to that, we're going to look at these three different programs. And first I'll try looking at it with Google Translate. So Google Translate went online as of April 2006, and it was able to translate English, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. And I guess those were chosen rather randomly from the standpoint of Google. But it has advanced to the point today where now, as of April 2025, Google Translate supported 249 languages, dialects, and language varieties with 240 unique languages and dialects. Now, what that means is that there are different versions of the same language depending on sometimes the country. If you look at this list, I know it's hard to see on the screen, but if you were to go to Google Translate and look at all of the languages, you'd see things like Portuguese and the parentheses with Brazil, or Portuguese and parentheses Portugal. So the Portuguese spoken in Brazil is significantly different from the Portuguese spoken in Portugal because they've been separated for some time and they're different, let's call them and economics forces and all sorts of different forces that change the language that's being used in a country. And of course, there's the difference in immigrants. Portugal itself is where the immigrants came from when they went to Brazil and are still doing that, by the way. But on the other hand, a lot of other countries have immigrated to people from a lot of other countries have immigrated to Brazil, and the language has been changed because of all these extra company languages. Uh, there's people who speak English, there's people who speak German, there's people who speak all sorts of other languages, Japanese and Chinese. And so as the languages change over time, it can be important to have a more focused way. That's why what Google is doing, and um, and I guess I get feedback on Google's language translate here. And the first thing is that I always say this is not Google does not give you a literature level translation. In other words, if you're looking for wonderful prose, basically what you get is a word for word translation from the languages. And those translations are perfectly adequate for genealogical research. We just need to know what it says. We don't need to have it in some kind of, poetic format or something. So from that standpoint, it's very, and all of this, by the way, is changing because of artificial intelligence. AI is having this tremendous impact on translation and on the way that things are translated. And as we get into it here a little bit, you'll see that you can just do lots of different things. You'll see there on the Google Translate uh, top menu bar, you'll see text. That means you can type in something from the language. Now, if it happens to be one in a script, I'm using Hungarian here as an example. Um, and Hungarian has a lot of diacritics, means there's little marks over the letters that change the meaning of the words. And so typing letters in is can be a challenge. And you can also use if you have the computers can change your keyboard to a certain language so that you can use that to enter information. But so the question here, of course, is if you know enough to use a keyboard that has all the diacritics, you probably know how to translate the language already yourself, and you're not having to rely on Google Translate. But this is what we're talking about is just cold connection, just going in with the language just as just it like it was um, like you've never heard of it before. And that happens a lot, especially as you go back in your time. So in this case, we could also drop in an image. So we have images. That means that if you do a screenshot of a document and you want to have that document translated, you could just do a screenshot of the document and put it in. Now, Google will ask for certain file formats, and the ones they ask for are can be a challenge. I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go along. Um, and secondly, you can put in a document. Now, what's the difference between putting in an image of a document and the document is that the document has to be in a specific format, like a PDF file with the document that you're looking at. And also you can put in the URL of a website and have it translate the website. The thing about having, if you're working in Chrome, for example, which is the most popular of the search search uh, online, uh, if I can, browsers, then you are basically you can have Chrome put translation in as an option. Anytime anything shows up in a language, you don't your primary language that you define. So if you define your primary language as English and something comes up in Spanish or Hungarian or Russian or whatever, then it will ask you if you want to translate it into English or leave it in that language. And so websites are pretty well taken care of, but if, in the case that you want to do so, you can type in a URL and get the website translated, the whole website. So now, if we put in, for instance, here, I'm going to put in using Google Translate and Google Lens for genealogical research, and then I'll start this and we'll see it'll come up in Hungarian. So, and those little marks, the diacritical marks there are the things that in Hungarian have a tendency to change meanings, so they're important. So that's essentially the whole idea here. Now, there's a couple of other things that are interesting, and that is there's for some of the languages there's a little speaker down here, and in some of the languages there's a microphone. So you could just click on the microphone and put in the English that you wanted, for example, and then it would translate what you said. Hmm. And you'd have to make sure that you can speak clearly enough to get a good uh, transcription of your speech. But over on the other side, if you wanted to hear what it sounded like in Hungarian, you can click on the little um, speaker icon here and be able to hear it in Hungarian. The other way to do this is to drag and drop so that you can drag and drop the image in, and then you can choose a file or browse your files to get the file in. So there's in this case, for example, you're going from Hungarian, which you're going to drag and drop and have it come in English. And you'll see here that it says supported file types JPEG, JPEG, PNG, and WebP. And then there's a way to learn more about that, of the filing, of the types of images that you're putting in there. So here I'm dropping a file in, and it was in Hungarian. Now Hungarian on the left and English on the right. So that was an image, and now the image is in English. So this is, if you have not been acquainted with this before, this is almost to the point of being miraculous, because the, how fast that it can do that, and how complete and easy it is for it to happen, just makes it so that it becomes a very, very, very useful tool for all of your interactions. So now let's say I was going to do research in Hungary. The answer is I can do research in Hungary, although I do not speak, read, or write Hungarian, because I can use Google Translate to translate practically any document or any record that I need. Now, the question, of course, is can it do handwriting recognition? And the answer to that is sometimes. And we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But basically, it is extremely useful for doing translations. So now here's another example, and we're going to go to go to a file. And now the file type, as I mentioned, they were going to be specific file types. You have a docx, which is a Word file, and then a Microsoft file, Word file, a PDF document, a PPT text document, PowerPoint text, or an XLSX document, which is for spreadsheets, primarily Excel, Microsoft. Okay, so these are the formats that you can that are most supported. And if your document doesn't happen to be in one of these formats, you may have to have it somehow transferred to a PDF and a document or a docx or whatever. The and my from my experience in doing this, I have found that Adobe Acrobat, and you need Adobe Acrobat Pro to do that, but it's a program that may or may not be available. Depending on how many documents that you're going to be working with, it's worth your effort to get the Pro version of Acrobat so that you can simply take a document and change it into a PDF file, and then is available. Now, one other thing that will come up in the translate process is that you won't be able to, the file that you have needs to be clear enough, and the resolution good enough for the Google Translate to adequately work. And so I was getting, as I've been working with this for the last long time, I've found many instances when I was sort of fighting with the resolution, and so sometimes when I think I'm translating a document and I'm getting bad resolution, I can get the document translated by translating it as an image, because they seem to have a little bit more tolerance for fuzzy and hard to read text. So here's an example of the website. Now, many of the European websites that you work with will have their structure so that you can have the website in this case in Hungarian and also in English. So I could click on the a pop-up menu here, and it would translate what you're seeing over there in English. But what you're not seeing over there is anything that's really helpful to you when you're looking for an archive document, because all of the document names and the collections names and everything are in Hungarian. So now you can, if you go to translate, Google Translate will then start translating all the Hungarian on the page. So you'll see that uh, the names of the documents are there and the information is there, and then you can get the same feature out of the context of the document also, meaning all the text and all the information that's in the documents. We're generally speaking, we're looking at things like census records, we're looking at things like church records, we're looking at things like civil registration records and all these different kinds of records that we may want to look at. And the advantage, of course, here is that as you get some experience using it, then you'll be able to make some progress in not having to depend on Google Translate because you'll become familiar with the names of the entries for the fields of entry on various documents. And as you get to know that, and also on parish registers, usually those are formulaic, meaning they come up with the same form on every parish register. Every entry is basically a repeat of the same with the different names of the people and whatever. And once you have some experience doing that with Google Translate, you can often, it's a way to teach you to do the specific things that we are interested in and learning about from the language as genealogical researchers. So one other thing that's important, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and that is that we have this one selection here to detect languages. And if you have no idea what language it's in, then you can go in and have Google give you a guess at which the language is. It may be something that's so restricted or such a small area that Google can't find it or recognize it. But if it's one of the major languages of the world, of which there are around 300 plus, then Google will instantly be able to tell you what language that is in. Now, as I said, and I'll explain this a little bit further, that many of the large archives have ways to translate their website into English or other languages. And often it will allow you to, in this case, the Spanish archive is in a variety of different languages, but this is when you're looking at it in English. Now, here's what the key is. The key is once you move away from your structure of the archive into the actual documents and are looking for documents, generally speaking, none of that is translated. So you're stuck with still going in and focusing in on a way to get the documents translated. And what I'm saying here is that the records are usually going to be in the country language. Now, that doesn't always apply because, for example, in Europe, the Austro-Hungarian Empire extended into many different countries. And in each of those countries, you may find records in German. For example, one of the places I was looking recently was in Romania for records and found the parish registers to be in German. So you just have to. This is a reason why these particular tools are especially important. Here's a little kind of a side note on this too. I use Google Translate to write my emails into Spanish, even though I speak, read, and write Spanish. Okay, so why do I do this? It's very simple. Um, it's faster for me to do it. And the reason is because then I don't have to go look for the diacritical marks. I should have given a good example with a lot of diacriticals, but uh, that way I'm not trying to change my keyboard and I'm not trying to type in Spanish and do all of that. And I just have to put it in English and do it. Now the question is, how do I know it's correct? I know it's correct because I can read it and then I can change it to the way that I would change it to be. Sometimes, for example, in Spanish, Um, there's a familiar form of Spanish, which I don't generally use when I'm doing research directly with people. I'm more on a formal basis. And so I would go in and change if Google shows up in the familiar form, then I would go back and change all of it into the formal form. Um, there's just ways that these things that this translating programs can be used that are sort of out of the realm of what you would normally think would be the use for a program like this. Now, it could be that with your research and your life, you start out in whatever language it is, and that's the only language you ever find as you go back in time until it becomes Latin or old Spanish or any of the of changing languages back, usually around the 15 to 1600s. It becomes close to being unreadable unless you know Latin or unless you know um, some of the other languages, the older languages. But so there are kind of shortcuts here that you can use for this. So as I say, it's faster, it adds the diacritical marks, and I always read through the translation for accuracy. I don't just, I never rely on 100% on Google or anyone else, any other program, especially the AI programs. I'm uh, I'm always making sure that I've verified whatever information that they've given me. So here's an example of of going into a language that you may not be able to even read without having studied the language. And it gives, and in this case, it gives a one in Hebrew, the transcription of this language from English, translation from English to Hebrew. It gives two different sets of Hebrew. First of all, it gives it in the Hebrew script, the standard Hebrew, and below in Roman scripts. So you can see what the transcription of that would be in Hebrew into uh, a Hebrew representation of it. And down here, then you can put the Hebrew and wait. Okay, so what you're doing here is this. You want to know if, because you can't read the Hebrew, so you're not like what I am with Spanish, where you can go in, I can go in and read the Spanish and say, yeah, it's correct and fine. But I can't do that with Hebrew, and I can't do that with other languages. Um, but I can translate Hebrew, but I now that I have Google Translate, I don't have to even spend my time translating Hebrew. But this is the question. So if I have this in English and then I translate it into Hebrew, what happens if I translate the Hebrew back into English? How close is it going to be to what it was originally? In other words, this is a way of seeing uh, how, if any, changes are made in the English portion of it as it goes through the the Hebrew, in this case, the Hebrew translations back and forth. And if you read the two, you'll see that the information is essentially correct, but there may be, in some instances, may be some differences. And so those are the kinds of things that you should be aware of when you're working at the level. Now, this would be for importance if you're actually recording a document. So, for instance, if you're trying to do a deed, a Hebrew deed, and it's in Hebrew, and you want it in English, you may not get all of the of Hebrew terms correct because there may be some legal terms in Hebrew that aren't translated correctly. So when you translate it back into from Hebrew back into English, you can see where there are problems perhaps with the translation that was made. Um, and these are kind of these are not unusual circumstances because it happens in any language, whether you're going to French or German or all of the major languages in Europe, any Scandinavian languages or wherever it is your family uh, ultimately comes from. Or if you're just sitting there in England until the language changes to Middle English, then you will have these same challenges of making sure that the information that you get from the translation is correct. And this is one way of seeing how close the translation is to the original. So here's the rule. If you're unsure of the translation, copy the text. Even if you aren't sure of the translation, you may want to do this just to see what kind of level of accuracy you're dealing with. Copy the text, translate it back into English or whatever language that you speak. So something that you recognize. Now, when you've used Translate and you've begun to use that and understand how it works, it becomes kind of a constant background to your to what you need to do. Um, for example, I'm going to give another example of the situation where even if I know the language and I can write and I can do it, sometimes I don't want to. So what if I have a text that's all in Spanish and I need to actually copy it, like it's a parish register or a document. And I don't want to sit there and I can translate it, but I want a copy of it. Well, putting it into Google Translate gives me the text right there. I don't have to go through the process of typing or retyping something from Spanish into English while even if I can do that. So the fact that I still can read the Spanish means that what I get is going to be understandable and I be able to correct it. But on the other hand, it makes it a lot easier for me to do than it does if I simply just think, well, I've got to translate this myself. And I may run into words that I'm not familiar with because there may be legal terms or maybe other things in there, some Latin thrown in and it may be important to just try to get the tools here to use it. Now, let's address Gemini. Gemini is Google's AI chatbot. It is the interface between Google's AI models and what you're doing uh, in from using this as a tool. So what's the story here? Why is it Gemini? Why isn't it chat, um, you know, any one of the other chatbots out there? And I don't want to start listing off chatbots, but it just, why am I focusing on Google? Well, because at the time that this particular presentation is made, the tools that are available from Google and Google Gemini are a step advanced from what's coming out with ChatGPT or one of the other ones. Because what it does is it gives you the sources where it gets the information. So it doesn't give you just, it takes it provides you with narratives or outlines, but it doesn't, and it also gives you, if you're asking for facts, it will give you facts. It will give you links to the websites where it actually got the information, and then you can then verify whether or not that information is correct or not. Now that kind of gets a long ways away from the issue that was current back 2 years ago, 3 years ago, where they were talking about AI hallucinating or providing wrong information. There's still that possibility, and you still have to double check everything that's there, but it gives you a way to do that checking rather than having to go out and search for checking yourself. So this is kind of an advancement here. But the question here is, what can you do with the document that you put into um, uh, Gemini? What if I drop a document into Gemini and say, translate this into English? Um, and my assessment here at this point is that there's a limited ability to translate or transcribe handwritten documents. If it's text, if it's typed, printed text, there's no question that it'll do a very good job of translating. If it's a handwritten document, it will make a good attempt, but it may not be able to read all the handwriting. And sometimes it will not see the word as correctly as you can if you look at it yourself. So here's how you use Gemini. So I got this document, and this again is in Hungarian. And I'm going to just drop this into the prompt area and ask you Google to, Gemini to translate the document into English. So then when I do that, here's the analysis, and here's the English translation of the provided Hungarian text. Um, I'm using Hungarian for my examples here because it's probably not a language commonly that people who live in the United States have studied in school. In other words, here in Utah Valley and in Utah in the United States, we have schools who are dedicated to Chinese immersion and to other language, French and other language immersion schools, where the children can go to school and learn English, keep their English language, but learn another language in school uh, at, constantly. In other words, there's immersive. They have to learn Spanish or German or French or whatever they're learning. So here's the question: if this is what it says, what does this say in Hungarian? Is that correctly that it says here? Now, what I could do is what I've already said is translate it, have Gemini translate the text to English back into Hungarian, and then translate the translated text, the retranslated text into English and see what you get. So that would be one way to text this. So this is from the earlier slide, and I ask it to translate that. And we did that translation in Translate, Google Translate. Another way of seeing if Gemini is being accurate is to use Google Translate, because they are different programs. And from a standpoint of which is better, if someone asks that question, which is the better translation, my experience up to date may change tomorrow, but my experience up to date is that Google Translate does a better job than Gemini. But that's just because you're they're different. You're getting a different thing. You're getting a different results out of Gemini than you are out of uh, Google Translate. So here's the original again, and then here is the text. And so and there's some extra explanations. One thing that Gemini does, the Translate does not do, is Gemini will sometimes explain what's going on. So if you look back at this bottom, it said the text refers to footnotes 1 and 2, which are likely citations in the original source document, but are not detailed in this image excerpt. So it's explaining to you that there are some footnotes that are available, but they're not going to be translated because they're not in there in what you've done. So you may need to go search for the rest of the document and find the footnotes and get the information that you needed from the footnotes. And Google Translate would not tell you that. Okay, so that's not something that Google Translate does. Now, now here's a Swedish Book of Registration Boards and Review from 1891. This is something you would be doing if you were getting into let's call it more more than just superficial Swedish genealogical research. If you really are getting into trying to understand and get as many records as you can and resolve some of the difficult issues that may arise with your Swedish research, this would be the kind of a document you would need. And it's available online. Here's the screenshot of the image here of this particular page. I just chose this page randomly. Most of my examples come from files on FamilySearch.org, so I'm using that as where I get the source material for the slides. So basically, I can just drop this into um, here. So here's the original Swedish, and then here's what they give me for the translation. And so you can see what it starts to talk about. And it is giving you it's not just doing a strict translation word for word and saying that you've got it. It is explaining what it's doing as it goes along. Gemini explains what it's doing. And also, they give you additional information that may not be in the original document, such as the note here about archaic spellings and a later military context. Now, here's one of what I have found to be an amazing help. And it comes because of what I mentioned earlier about my doing consultations in Latin America, Spanish-speaking countries across the world, and other languages. It doesn't matter which country or language we're talking about. It could be Italian, it could be German, it could be whatever. So one of the questions that always comes up, and with regards to finding church records, is what are the parishes that are in that town? So if we go to um, Family Search, for example, and we look for a place in the world, someplace in the world, we may not find it. In other words, Family Search may never have gotten records from that place. But on the other hand, we want to know where we could start to get the records for that place. And I'm going to go at it from the church record standpoint. And I want to know, in this case, it's in Ecuador. I want to know where the churches are. So one thing I could do in this situation is just ask Gemini. I just say, can you tell me the Catholic parishes in Latacunga, Ecuador? And there's the list. And it gave me their addresses, their phone numbers, available Facebook pages, and a map showing their locations. Now, why is this remarkable? Because if I were trying to do this, which I have for years now, had to go through the process of trying to find the parish for a small municipality in Ecuador or Colombia or Argentina or Peru or any other country that speaks Spanish, I would spend a tremendous amount of time. I can spend hour, 2 or 3 hours, and still not find it. And the ways that I would be finding it would be to go through the Catholic directories that are online. They're uh, if you're dealing with primary Catholic Church countries, such as the Spanish-speaking countries and Romance countries, coming out of Italy in the Roman Catholic Church and in the Eastern Orthodox churches, you recognize that the value of their parish registers, of their registrations of births, marriages, and burials, not births, but baptisms, marriages, and burials. So you're always looking for the parish. And then you can, if you find the parish, then the chances are you can find it's possible to see if Family Search has the records for that parish. Now it may need also need the next level of Spanish record keeping, which is at the diocese. And the diocese would copy Spanish record, the parish registers periodically, usually annually. And so there may be an extra copy. So Family Search may have the diocese records, which includes the parish registers, or it may just have the parish registers. But unless I know the parish registers in the diocese, I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do with it. And it doesn't help me to get a long list of diocese and parishes records from Family Search for the province or the district or the municipality. But here, once I've got this information from Gemini, um, or and and basically I've got the information that I need to find the records, whether I need to find the records. And when I'm working with people, I may have to say, we don't have the records from that place on Family Search, but here's the name of the church and here's the address, and in some cases the phone number and all that. And uh, and you can call these people or contact them for the records. Um, and so this is just something that's created a step that for me was taking hours of time, and now is a simple fact of asking uh, Gemini. Or I can also, by the way, and I mentioned it here, Microsoft Copilot to do the same thing. So I can do that. And by when I click on it, so we have the official page for uh, the church La Merced La de Cunga. Um, and so we have quite a bit of information that we can start using. So now we're going to talk just a few minutes here about smartphone apps and their corresponding apps on the smartphone. I'm just going to mention that I use an iPhone 15 Pro Max. So your screens, when you go on your Android device or whether you go on another different version of the iPhone may be slightly or considerably different, but the same information is going to be available on all of the smartphones from Google. So here's the screen for starting on the left-hand side. There's the Google search screen for Google Translate on the iPhone. And then you have the different options of looking at it. Now, what Google is based on for the iPhone is based on the camera. So the camera is what you're going to get the information from. You can still type in things. You can still use Gemini to type in a question, but you can also use dictate directly into a question. And on Google Translate, you can still enter in text. So you have now on Google, this little icon up here is Google Lens, and Google Lens is um, uh, an active way of using your camera to get translations. So you can use your camera directly to look at a sign or look at a text bar. And one of the things that's happening is you can use the Google Translate in the sense of entering in writing or spoken text and carry on a conversation in a sense with the Google Translate. So I need to know how to get to it. I need to know how I say, or in Hungarian, how do I say, uh, how do I get to the National Museum? And so here is the in Magyar, which is Hungarian. And so what Google Lens does, acts like a search engine for the real world. So in this case, it can translate text, it can copy text from the real world. So you go out there and copy it. Then you can search for what you see. In other words, you can look at something and say, and have it tell you what it is, or how much it costs, or where you might buy it, or is this something I want to eat, or is this whatever you want to do with it? And you can use it for shopping. Uh, one of my daughters and a lot of my children have traveled in Europe extensively, and uh, basically they have their phones in their hands all the time. They're translating everything around them so that they know what they are and what they're doing, and for them, it's simple to walk into a store and pull out their phone to see what the price is in dollars from wherever country they are. They can identify plants and animals, explore places around you, scan codes. It can get your homework help, and it look up food menus and add contacts, calendar events. Google Lens does all of this, and it is a big enough tool that as you get to know how to use it, you'll find a lot more reasons to use it. It's something that is already capable of doing things that you don't expect. And you can also listen to text. So what it's Sunsai. So here we have a document that's on a screen. It's on my computer screen. And I want to have that portion that has the little white bars around it. I want that translated. And it's from French to English. So I'm looking at that on my screen. So now I'm seeing people in the library uh, with their smartphones using that to tell them to work their way through documents in languages that they don't know, because you're getting translations, immediate translations of what you see on the screen. So this is just coming up completely. So here's what the French said, and here's how it comes across in the English. The problem, of course, is that the text is in different format, and it may be a little bit harder to read because of overlap and things. But here is exactly, was done in real time. It's not something you have to wait while it does the translation. So, as I mentioned, we're seeing people do this and translate the text on their computer screen. They're just holding up their phone and translating the text. Now, let's a little note back to Google Gemini. Some of the things that it can do it can suggest record types. You can say what kinds of records are available for Civil War research in Kentucky, and it will answer the question and give you a long list of explanations, but it will also give you the links out to the actual records and brainstorm for search terms. So if you can't figure out what questions to ask, you can just keep asking questions of Gemini, and sometimes it will. And once you see the way it's reacting, it's going to help you train you to talk to it as you try to get it to talk to you, if you want to put it that way. It can explain methodologies. It'll go in and explain why you do something and how you do it and what's the steps that you need to go through. And it will help you to overcome brick walls, because it can give you focused information about the person, time, and the place. Often we think of in genealogy, if we can't find the person's name, if we can't find them in a certain number of records, then there's a brick wall and I can't do it. Well, here you can ask Gemini to give you additional information of records that you might be able to use to go through with this person. And I have seen it do that in tremendous detail. and help with information gathering and understanding the context. And that's another great help from it. And help you find the resources. You can just ask it to give you a list of all the, and this is an interesting thing because Family Search is completely searchable by Google. You can use Gemini to be your questions about what's on Family Search if you want to do that. And you can explain the historical context and define terms and a lot more stuff that it will do as you go along. So take time to learn all three tools, Gemini, Lens, and Google Text Translate. And so they're going to be as helpful. They just become part of how you do things. Now, in my situation, when I get up and start working in the morning, I may do 25 to 30 to 50 different searches on Google. And now, as I integrate the Google Gemini and the other text and translate those, whenever I have to switch into Spanish, they become important. Whenever I have to do research for someone, initial kinds of explanations of where they can find records and things like that, then these become tools that I can use constantly. So you need to keep learning and keep applying yourself to find out how all these work. And then the answer here is thanks for watching. And now,
Thank
do we
you.
have any questions?
We have one question about the accuracy of translations. Arlene said, were you verified by knowing both languages? About what percentage accuracy are you finding in the Google and AI translations?
Well, the Google translations they're not direct. If you're talking about Google Gemini translations are going to be um, as accurate as not that there's a slightly greater accuracy with Translate than there is with Google Gemini. But Translate, as far as my use of it with Spanish on a regular kind of day-to-day basis, um, it is always correct. I have never found anything wrong with it. Now, that depends on the language because the fewer people that use the language, Spanish is the second largest language in the world. And so there's lots of Spanish language text out there. It's just, billions of records. But you get to smaller languages in a small community, some places in the world, then those become harder to translate because there's not a great amount of text available. And you may be asking for words that are not yet words that are used in the language. So that's another problem.
A couple people have asked if there's a handout for today.
Usually what I do is give you folks a copy of the slides. So you'll get the slides. And I usually send that to you when we get done here.
Okay, that will be posted on the website with this recording. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
All right. 1 second. Okay, thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar on May 28th with Roger P. Meinert. He will be giving a presentation entitled German Immigrants in American Church Records Goes to Pennsylvania. A recording of this webinar will be made available by next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fh_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.